In this video, we're going to basically just distinguish between observational and experimental studies in statistics. But when we talk about the two different types of studies, these are the two we often hear about. But observational studies is where we're going to start. So an observational study, this is kind of says what it means and means what it says. But anything that is an observational study, we're going to just put it this way. It's all what the researcher's responsibility is. So a researcher is anybody that's doing the study. But an observational study, the researcher is hands off. That's what I want to write here is, and I'm going to put in quotes, hands off. And I don't know if that's hyphenated or not, but we say hands off. That is, the researcher merely observes. Researcher merely observes and draws conclusions from the data. So if I were doing like a observational study, I suppose this would be like if I were looking at the mile times of, say, a class of juniors at a high school, to kind of draw some, make some conclusions about the entire population of the high school's mile time. Basically, I would just record their data, kind of organize it, summarize it, analyze it, draw conclusions from it, and that's it. I mean, that's where my job would end. The difference between an observational study and an experimental study design is that in an experimental study design, let's go ahead and put this in here. Basically, we say the researcher, let me do this because I'm going to have a lot easier time typing for you guys than I am going to be writing it this way. The researcher is hands-on. And what you'll see a lot of the time with an experimental study is that the researcher is going to will organize the subjects, I should put quote-unquote subjects because this could be like cars as well as people or something like that, into separate groups. Okay, one of the groups will be unaffected or unchanged. We'll put untouched. And this is what we call, this is the control group. So whenever you've done an experiment, you say, well, I don't know, like, and in my experimental study, maybe I think that this beverage that I have you drink makes you run your mile faster. So what I'll do is I'll organize my class into two separate groups, and one of the groups doesn't get the beverage. This is going to be like doing what they normally do. That would be our control group. Then the researcher also organizes one or several experimental groups where they change something about the setup. So essentially, that would be in my instance there of running the mile and my beverage. My experimental groups would be any groups that received the beverage, because what I want to do is I want to compare the control group that has no change whatsoever. When I didn't touch them, I didn't do anything with that setup. I'm going to let them do what they normally do. I'm going to compare them to the group that I actually made a change on in the first place. So long story short, we could say observational study, just observe. Researcher is very hands-off. Just observe, draw conclusions. Experimental studies, what we're going to do is we're going to organize things into different groups, one of them being the control group, that's really important, and every other group being the experimental group, and we're going to change something about that. So we say the researcher is hands-on. Cheers.